Bojo ni Khan, Bobby Trey Trousdale, Nadeshnikas, Tecumseh, Oklahoma, Nadoch Bi'a. Hello, friends. My name is Bobby Trey Trousdale, and I am from Tecumseh, Oklahoma, though I do currently reside in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I am coming at you live for this NAT broadcast from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we are very excited to get started today. I want to start off by saying I hope that everyone had a phenomenal Indigenous Peoples Day. Whether you were celebrating in community, resting and relaxing, or taking a moment to remember the true message behind yesterday, we want to just make sure that that was good for you. We here at Native Americans in Philanthropy are ready to continue that celebration by welcoming you to our October member education session, Advocacy and Activism. You're joining us at such a pivotal time in Indian country and beyond. As you know, as of today's live broadcast, we are just 21 days away from casting our ballot in November's general election. This is a huge deal. We are witnessing razor-thin margins where stakes around Indigenous votes are being centered and are going to be pivotal to the nation's decision. Our session together last month delved deeper into this a bit more. And if you haven't had a chance to review it yet, I highly encourage you to check it out following today's broadcast or sometime in the near future. It resulted in not only being NAP's most viewed MES in our organization's history, but also echoed the pressure and importance of registering to vote and making a point to put that plan into action. We continue our civic engagement series today with our friends and partners in the field at HIP, Hispanics in Philanthropy. Though you'll hear from them in just a few moments, HIP and NAP advocate and serve each of our communities respectively within this complicated and colonized field of philanthropy. We're stronger together, we see each other as rejuvenating partners, and we each attempt to show up for community in new and innovative ways each and every day. I know this has been embodied under Eric, our leadership team, and everybody on our team here at NAP. I also wholeheartedly believe the same can be said for Hispanics in Philanthropy, for Latine communities. We're honored to be joined by a member of their leadership team today, Jazmín. Jazmín Chávez is HIP's Vice President of Innovation, Equity, and Communications. I'd like to welcome her to the session today and give her a chance to welcome you all into this digital space as well. Hey, Jazz.
Bobby. It is such a pleasure and such an honor to be with our partners, Native Americans in Philanthropy. I'm so excited for the conversation. We have a legend with us, and I'm so excited to just be in the same virtual space as Judith. But on behalf of Hispanics in Philanthropy, I just want to say buenos días, buenas tardes, good morning, good afternoon, a todas, todos, y todes, to everybody in this space. Like I said, it's an absolute privilege, and I want to welcome our members who are also watching this webinar today in this member education series, and what I hope is the first of many intersectional, collaborative, collective sessions that we'll be doing with NAP and other partners. But before we start, I do want to make sure that everybody saves the date. We have our conference together that's coming up between Native Americans in Philanthropy and Hispanics in Philanthropy. So save the date, June 16th through the 18th. We're coming down to the Southwest. We're going to be in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is beautiful, rich, spiritual country for us as well. So just really excited to be a part of it. Want to make sure folks save the date, June 16th to the 18th. Join us. It's going to be a phenomenal conference. And just want to say thank you to NAP and Judith for having us be a part of the space today.
Oh my gosh, I think we are so excited to have you. And I am already counting down the days for this conference. I just saw, before I logged on our LinkedIn and our Facebook, we are already, I think, having some ticket sales or getting ready to release those. And I was going to message our director of events and say, hey, snag me one if I'm not already on the staff list to come, because I have to be there, right? Like all the cool kids will be there. So I feel like I should be there.
Of
But
course.
if I framed it like that, I would not be able to go. So it'll be a great time for learning though together. So I think it's time to go ahead and pivot to getting us started, Jazz.
Let's do it.
I think you already mentioned the icon in the room. Right now behind stage. But yes, very honored to be in space and in place with her. I believe she's also in Santa Fe. We were talking just before this broadcast. But I just wanted to share a little bit before we bring Judith out. I wanted to just share a little bit of my own excitement and passion for today's talk. Advocacy and activism is actually rooted and is the start of my civic engagement journey. I'm not sure if I've ever shared this story outside of just like my friends or an interesting get to know you question. But when I was 7 years old in my town of Tecumseh, we were doing downtown development plan. And my grandparents they'd sold the home that my mother was raised in, and they were following my grandfather's dream of opening a small boutique hotel. And as part of that development plan, they were going to knock down the tree that I had used as kind of like my hangout. And they moved from the country into what we called the city proper. But I remember it was where, when I got stressed, it was just a place of respite for me and something that I think we picnicked under, and it just meant a lot. And so when they said they were going to knock that down, I talked to my grandfather about it, and he was a great jokester, but also very just supportive in all that I think in all of his different endeavors, and of course to us as a family. And he encouraged me to like do something about it. Like if I felt like there was something wrong, he wanted to help. And so he asked, what did I want to do? And I actually ended up chaining myself to a tree with the straps that he had in the back of his car. And so from that, had the opportunity to meet with our city council manager, who was listened and I had a sign that said honk if you want to save this tree. So I think he was getting noise complaints about all the honking that was taking place downtown from our typically quiet town. So was called into his office with my grandmother, and he took the time to sit down and explain why the development needed to take place, what the grant process to get those funds had looked like, and that it was time bound, but did make a point to change some of the development plans on that specific corner to try and keep that tree, and brought in a specialist to check and make sure that that tree could survive. It unfortunately could not, given just the fact that you're adding semen into natural space. But in that, attended a city council meeting, was encouraged to attend a city council meeting and petition for our centennial clock for our city to be put where the tree once stood. So that is where it is still today. Every time I drive back home, I get to be able to remember that. But so advocacy and activism, truly, like, I think that those were kind of my genesis for this idea of being engaged civically. And so it just holds a special place. So I'm really excited to dive into it with the one and only Judith, who I feel like we can all take pointers from. Like I said, I consider that kind of my nerd origin story, as I regularly started to attend the city council meetings from that point until I graduated high school and could civically engage in other ways. Bringing that into today, in addition to my work here at NAP, I'm able to see the power of advocacy and activism by serving on the board of directors at the ACLU of Oklahoma, which I want to highlight and just advocate for, and saying has I believe the largest Indigenous delegation of any affiliate in the country. And I think that that is just representative of the amazing communities and the amazing community support that we're able to take from them. So advocacy and activism are essential to the practice of democracy, especially for communities that have historically been oppressed and excluded. These tools have empowered us to ensure our voices and needs are heard and respected. However, the burden of that work often falls on overextended organizers and nonprofit organizations. Their diverse perspectives and mission reveal the many challenges facing communities of color and the issues that we must address for future generations. These perspectives and efforts are critical to our sovereignty and our collective progress. Dissent is necessary and should be safeguarded. For Native and Latine communities, centering an Indigenous worldview is key to amplifying original voices and fostering sustainable solutions. There are some amazing, amazing advocates and leaders doing this work day in and day out for Indian country and Indigenous communities across the globe. I mean, truthfully, y'all, selecting today's guest representatives became such a thing as we tried to narrow it down and elevate these organizations on this platform. But we opted to do this the best way by simply bringing in an icon from the field to present her experience and lifelong commitment to Native people and community. That said, alongside the amazingly talented Jazmín, who will be representing HIP, NAP is ecstatic to welcome leader, icon, and auntie to the world, Judith LeBlanc.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I am so honored to be in conversation with the both of you, but especially Jazmín. I'm a follower of Hispanics in Philanthropy. And because it's a conversation, it is so on target, because it's in moments like this when you have to reflect together in a circle. And the circle has to be very wide and also very holistic, because many of our traditional stories are not about saving our own particular tribe. I'm a citizen of the Caddo Nation. It's our origin story is not about saving the Caddo. It's about saving and working in relationship to the natural world and all human beings, humanity. So I'm really excited about having this conversation with you. And I got to tell you, Bobby, you gave me a full belly laugh to use the word iconic or icon and my name in the same sentence. Total full belly laugh, because my family would say about me, constantly moving, like not even like a wave upon the sand, like kind of a tsunami on the sand. So I'm going to throw out iconic, but I think the definition for being an icon is really going to a lot of rodeos. I've been to a lot of rodeos, many political moments that were as decisive and critical as the one we're in right now. Because as we like to say in Indian country, the past and the future only come together in one place, the present. So let's get this party started.
Let's do it. Thank you for that. And I feel like at this point, neither of you need an introduction, as we've already started. But I've been assured by my fellow team members that we root this in formality. So we will go ahead and do those introductions, and I'm sure I will devolve our conversation from there. But we will get started there. So please take as much time as you need, share what makes you, you, and go ahead and hit us with, I know this is a lot, but hit us with like, what started your involvement with Indigenous advocacy and or activism? And Jazmín, I'll throw it to you first for that one.
Awesome. So thank you so much. As Bobby mentioned, my name is Jazmín Chávez, and I'm the VP of Innovation, Equity, and Communications for Hispanics and Philanthropy, currently out of the ancestral lands of the Cheyenne Ute in Denver, Colorado, but originally from Juárez, Chihuahua, Mexico, the land of the Rarámuri, the land of the Suma. So really, really excited to just be here and be in community with y'all. For me, what started my activism around both Latine, Chicano, Hispanic, and Indigenous issues was actually in Colorado. We grew up with what was Columbus Day. And every year since I can remember and since I was little, I would always see on the news the activists getting arrested to block the Columbus Day parade. And also growing up in Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico, my family comes from the Raramuri, it comes from the Suma of Chihuahua. And it was always interesting to kind of see the differences between like the Mexicano community and the indigenous communities of Northern Chihuahua. But then on the US side, it was really interesting to see the live, for me at a very small age, seeing the live battle to preserve the narrative and to take back a narrative, right? And I remember having conversations with my teachers and my parents about the why. Why are folks getting arrested? Why is it that they're fighting against Columbus? And my parents were just like, they're straight up. They're just like, because it's a lie. And it didn't happen that way. And so that's why people are getting arrested, because they're fighting for what they believe. And they want to make sure that people acknowledge the real history of what's happened to indigenous communities in the United States. But it was something that I must have been like in 3rd or 4th grade, because up until that point, you hear you have to study the 3 ships of Columbus, and you have to study the origins of Thanksgiving. And it sounds all hunky dory. And it was that moment for me that really changed it. And so when I was old enough, it became also myself participating actively in those protests, and even being like, my first arrest is going to be at the Columbus Day parade. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to stand in solidarity with our indigenous community, and I was able to do it. I was able to be and to participate once I was able to be kind of older and my parents weren't freaking out about it. And so for me, it was one of the first times in Denver that I saw the solidarity between the Chicano community, the indigenous like Mexica community coming together with our Native American community here in Denver to stop that, right? And it had a really powerful impact in my life that continues to carry in understanding what are the intersections that we have with indigenous communities that are not separate or either or, but really rooted in similar issues, and also shared histories and collective histories in a collective memory that we have to remember that what happened to indigenous communities then came afterwards to the rest of us, right? And so that's a little bit about why I got involved, seeing that, kind of really changed my life here in Colorado.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have to ask, did you get arrested?
It's funny. I didn't get arrested here, but I've been arrested many times in Washington, D.C. So, and it was mostly, and I'll say this because my parents grew up at a time where they were I grew up undocumented. And so for me to get arrested was not something that wasn't possible, because we knew what the challenges would be. And also my parents thought that the FBI was like watching me because we were actively involved, and rightly so. They knew the history, right, that happened to other communities. And so they were very much like, please don't get arrested. But I went and I would protest and I would support. I eventually became a legal observer as well. And then I ended up getting arrested many times in Washington and New York. So I made up for it later.
He said, don't worry, I got my time behind bars.
Yeah.
Well, Judith, let's throw it to you. What makes you you, and what kind of like started all of this?
So I'm a wicked urban Indian. 70% of us live in cities. And when you're a wicked urban Indian, then you you have 2 paths. Number one, you build community where you live. And our people have always done that. Our people have always migrated, always, including 2 big cities. The first intertribal women's organization was in the late 1800s. It was founded at the time of the First World's Fair to protest the way our people were being portrayed in the First World's Fair. And it was the American Indian Women's Society, Educational Society. The American Indian Women's Educational Society, founded in Chicago in the late 1800s. So wicked urban Indians, we have a history. But as a wicked urban Indian growing up, my formative linguistic years were in Boston. I moved from Albuquerque at the age of 5, born in Texas, moved from Albuquerque to Boston. And so I'm a wicked urban Indian with a Boston accent. Do you know, as the executive director of the Native Organizers Alliance, what it must be like to go from territory to territory with a Boston accent? Oh my God! Oh my God! But I was always very connected to our land in Oklahoma, and I would spend the summers in Oklahoma with my grandma, who at that time, in the 60s, in the late 50s, early 60s, and into the 70s, she didn't have running water or electricity in Oklahoma. So we learned a lot and about the differences and why there were differences between living in the Boston area and living in Oklahoma and being Indian. And my cousins, all of whom are around my age now, in our 70s, they always have mocked my accent. But we were so close because they knew that when I would leave and come back, that I would have stories to share, but they would have even more important stories to share because they knew, they felt, even when we were little, that my hat was there. So the first time I became engaged in any kind of civic engagement advocacy was around Alcatraz. I was about 15, I think, and up in Boston, well, actually north of Boston, we had a can drive. Back then, you would collect cans for those who were suffering, and we sent big wooden crates to Alcatraz. And at that point, people in the East, their narrative was colonizers came with guns, germs, we were weak, they won, get over it. That was kind of the narrative, which we have interrupted many times since I was growing up. But with Alcatraz, it interrupted the narrative, and people were just, we were going door to door, and we had so many cans, and we raised the money. And then the leaders of Alcatraz called me on our party line, because back then you still had party lines, even north of Boston, and said, we thank you for your support, and we know Caddo people, and so on and so on. And now I think, why didn't I get their names? I was talking to real icons, to the real icons who interrupted the narrative and opened up a whole period of time into the 70s where we became highly visible. The issue of sovereignty was on the minds of people, our people, and was beginning to be questioned by the broader circles of people who live in and around Native people. So that's how I started, and then I made the critical off-roading when I got a Bureau of Indian Affairs grant. They used to give us grants to go to college. I graduated from high school in 70. I went to the University of Massachusetts. There were several natives there, and there was 1 week of orientation for the students of color. So there was a Navajo guy, there were several natives, and we were with the Black and Latino students, and they showed us all kinds of movies because it was 1970, a magic movement moment when all the movements, the women's movement, the anti-war movement, the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the American Indian movement was becoming very visible. So they showed us movies like The Battle of Algiers, the struggle against French colonialism in Algeria, or Z, the struggle against the right-wing dictatorship in Greece and how it was overthrown. And, I was just like, oh my God, because all of our teachers at that point were from the streets. There were people like Julius Lester from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. There were all kinds of real icons from the Black and Latino movement who were shaping the outlook of the students of color, because we were the first generation to graduate from high school. Not talking about college, to graduate from high school for many of our communities. And so then what did I do? Much to the chagrin of my family, in 1973, I quit college and was invited to go and work on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation to collect evidence to defend the largest number of federal indicted Indians ever due to the 1973 occupation of Wounded Knee. I lived there for a year, and it changed my life. It's my second home territory. I learned so much about the systemic elements of racism, that it wasn't just white people who had negative ideas about us, racist ideas, that there was a system that was perpetrating things that kind of channeled the divisions between people of color, communities of color, and white people. And so I just feel like I was so lucky to be among people who, you know, are still active today, like Madonna Thunderhawk, who was the leader of the American Indian movement, and others who understood that the struggle for sovereignty, the struggle against systemic racism, is a journey that heads to the horizon, that there's not one and done, that if we understand how history moves, we have a role to play in the present that is directly related to the past, but also is about the next 7 generations. So I was molded by that outlook. And I have had I've been to a lot of rodeos, a lot of times of political upsurges, because we're not always in a magic movement mode where all the movements are organizing. But I learned that things are in cycles and circles, that from an Indigenous framework, you understand that we go in and out of moments. We are reacting to and reacting with all kinds. We're all in relationship. All things are in relationship. And so I've been lucky. And I am now the executive director of the Native Organizers Alliance. And 9 years ago, I was approached because I had been working on the national level with the peace movement. I was the national field director of peace action with 1 million members in 29 states. And I was approached to head up the Native Organizers Alliance. And frankly, 9 years ago, it was the beginning of the magic movement moment we are in. It was a year and a half before Standing Rock. And Standing Rock again shook up the dominant narrative, interrupted it. But it was also at a time when Black Lives Matter, the Fight for 15, the fast food workers, the dreamers were on the move. And so that's the moment we're in now. And I feel so lucky to have been to so many rodeos and to understand the circles and cycles of social change where advocacy and activism is at the center of real, inclusive, multiracial democracy.
Oh my gosh. Judith, we can just end the conversation there, right? Like, are you kidding me? This is why you earn icon status.
Great chat. We're good. We did the job.
We did the job. I mean, everybody go home. Judith cleared the table with that one. No, that's just the introduction, folks. We still have questions to get through. No, but Judith, in your answer, like, I think you really kind of hit on this because you provided a really in-depth overview and you were mentioning those movements and those mentors that brought you into this space or that you were working alongside and formed in. And I want to throw it to you. It's like, take us to school. What have advocacy and activism looked like historically in our communities?
Well, that is a very important question, because I think until 2020, really 2018, many did not think that Indian country was politically significant. They would say, you're statistically insignificant. But what we have proven, what people have woken up to, is after that interruption of the narrative of who we are in the 21st century that happened due to Standing Rock and thousands of people moving on behalf of the sovereign right of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe to protect not only water for the 10,000 members of their nation, but for the 17 million people who live downstream. So people began to understand that when we're talking about our concerns, they're really majority concerns. Water, climate, majority concerns globally and in this country, no matter what political, where you are on the political spectrum. And I would say that this political moment is one where we have to understand that elections don't build power. The results of elections are a picture, a snapshot of our power in Indian country. And in between the elections, we build our power by advocating and organizing on our issues. And as we advocate and organize, we are engaging our communities, and then we're able to show our power in leveraging our community's voice. So, every vote counts. We've never experienced that. Communities of color have never had every vote counted. But every time our communities vote and move together, that's when the real power and the ability for us to have impact on policies happen. And that happens in between the elections. So back to your original question, and that is that, in Indian country, we do not have the, what do they call it? The non-profit industrial complex. We don't have that because philanthropy has not been willing to invest in Indian country as they should. And so therefore, our organizing has always been very grounded in traditional ways. The Native Organizers Alliance, we do leadership support and training for people who want to organize power in their communities, on reservations and in urban areas. But the only way we can be effective is to frame it within the what our traditional cultures and belief systems are. We have to build our community engagement. And so we're supporting many leaders, elected spiritual and community organizers now who understand that, who it's so different than the 70s. And so much better because, for instance, I just came from Crow Reservation, where I'm working with a group of over 20 organizers and activists who came together to work on nonpartisan voter engagement, but they were together because they had done a community cleanup. They had removed cars that had broke down and were just laying in people's cars. They raised the money to create a real waste management program. And now they see themselves as being a part of the fight to save democracy by registering people to vote, because one of the most critical Senate races will be determined by the native vote in Montana. So I think the recognition, that snapshot of our political power that was seen in 2020 and really in 2018 when the first 2 Native women were elected to Congress, and then the nomination of Deb Haaland, which was driven by grassroots organizing. The Biden transition team did not pick Deb. They wanted an elder white guy who had experience, period. Over 200 tribes were organized and mobilized, and 19,000 people signed a petition to nominate Deb. We did that. And what we've seen is a historic shift in the priorities of the Department of Interior and real structural reforms that have made a difference on the ground when it comes to co-management of land resources, when it comes to how our boarding school history and the drama and trauma that it's created, how murdered and missing Indigenous people are protected and their families are given support. There's all kinds of, over 200 co-management plans are underway with tribal federal government. So I say all that to say is that our power is very grassroots and it has to be organized. And we do not have enough resources to do all that we can to maximize our power, but we're getting there.
Absolutely. We'll come back to that, like we're getting there and what do we need to succeed. But Jazz, I want to take a moment to expanding this conversation. What have advocacy and activism looked like, whether that is in Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, I think perspective, from a global perspective? Help us expand that. And if you don't mind, like also how has that affected the development strategies for engagement and advocacy today?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I love kind of that we're getting into the meat now. I think I think historically also, like, I agree that there's like magic movement moments, right? I grew up with, I'm an ethnic studies bachelor's. So like everything, I'm like, yes, 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 all of it. Because I came from an activist campus of CU Boulder, where we were very actively involved multiracially within our organizations and our groups, from Oyate, who was the Native American groups, to our Muslim Student Association, Black Student Alliance, the Chicano Mechistas and students, right? And I think people want to have us believe that we actually keep to ourselves and we tend to work in isolation of one another's issues. And the reality is that we've been organizing multiracially in solidarity for forever, right? And not just like coming back to the 70s, even before that, there's a lot of different historical elements. And that's why we say a lot of shared memory around the ways in which issues impact Native American communities, and also in the Southwest, what would be the Chicano Hispanic communities, right? Just as we have the Indian boarding schools, that gave rise to the Americanization schools against Mexican Americans in the United States, right? It was the exact same model that was then used, right, to try to convert Mexicans to be more American and to get Spanish and to beat Spanish out of them, right? And a lot of people don't understand that. It's like that gives rise to this, which eventually gives rise to what is pretty much the child welfare system in the United States, right? So for us at Hispanics and Philanthropy, because we are transnational, we actually center within our racial equity work. And that's actually not our work, it's a thread that goes to our entire organization to look at the intersection of Indigenous cosmology and Indigenous perspectives within our work. And I really want to shout out Paula Fedegrino, who runs our gender equity program, Joan Roselo Cornier, who runs our Power Building and Justice program, Andrea Villaseñor, who runs our migration program, Judith Mejia, who runs our digital innovation program. And the reason I want to shout them out is because every single one of those grant-making programs actually have and center both a multiracial lens, but also Indigenous components to the work, right? So our gender equity work actually supports a significant amount of Indigenous Mayan women in the Yucatan and in southern Mexico. And it's about, Judith, to your point, we're not telling them how to organize. We're not telling them what to organize. We're just providing the funding and the resources for them to do what they need for their community from a gender Indigenous lens, right? We had a campaign called Lenguas Vivas with our Hip Give platform, which is the only Latino bilingual crowdfunding platform that was in 7 Mayan Indigenous languages. We did the capacity building in Indigenous languages. We did the outreach, both radio and in like newspapers in Indigenous languages. And the reason for that is because we're very clear that there's differences between communities in both Mexico and obviously here on the US side, who, whether we claim the Chicanismo and the Mexica ancestry or other ancestries that our communities belong with, but we are very intentional of being able to really center that. And even with our migration program, right, we're also looking at the ways in which Indigenous migrant communities are traveling, the racist kind of prejudice that they are encountering as they travel up, for two-spirited communities that are coming from Indigenous lens, looking at protections and shelters that are really supportive of their needs, and then supporting organizations on this side, like Cielo, who does an incredible job of providing Indigenous translators to migrant communities, right? And so, and then of course, our Power Building and Justice program that is specifically rooted in the South, in the Southwest, is also investing in Native leaders. And it isn't just about, well, we're Latinos, we're only investing in our own, we got to get our house in order first. It really is, and this is why I'm really proud of our programs and our directors, is because we understand that if we're equally rooted in liberation, then that means we're rooted in liberation for all, and that one issue is going to impact all of us. It impacts us collectively. And I think the thing that, I think the Standing Rock example is perfect, that it isn't just about the immediate needs of one community, but it's looking at the protection of the humanity and the access for so many. Right. And so for us, we really intentionally do that. And also Hilda Vega, who runs our climate justice work for HIP, she very much centers an Indigenous cosmology of understanding that if we really want to take care of the climate justice issues, we should be investing in Indigenous communities in the Americas, in the US, who are the caretakers of the land, who know how to take care of the land, who should receive federal funding to take care of the land and the rivers and the streams. And she's done a phenomenal job of also providing grants and opportunities, and also learning opportunities for these communities to come together and build that cosmology and that vision and shared kind of strategies together about how we do that. So for us at HIP, that's why I say is never an either or. And I think just being Latina, Mexican American, Chicana, our history is so complicated in the sense of we carry indigenous blood, we carry colonizer blood, but how do we return to a state of love for our indigeneity, right? Which is what the Chicano movement did for so many of us. And it's also part of the lens of the conference of why we're coming to Albuquerque. And my poor conference team knows, I've been very clear where it's like, this is not just about we show up in the Hispanic Southwest. Like there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of conflict around even the history of the Southwest. So let's honor from beginning to like the impact, right? Because I'll beat this over and over, but we have a shared history and a shared memory that allows us to build together, and it should push us to build together and understand that we're not building in isolation, but we're building in support of one another over and over and over.
Absolutely. I hope we do continue to beat on that, because I think we're of course talking about that in this space, but I do want to say, like, from an individual perspective, I think out in the field, sometimes it can get very isolating, and that plays such a or takes such a toll on the body, on the mind, on the spirit. And having that intentionality rooted in, I think, Judith, in your work, and then Jazz, and how you're even talking about that thread going throughout all of HIP's programming, that's the difference. That's, I think,
That's right.
The difference of having us in charge, or having the answers coming from our community, is we're able to take this interdisciplinary, personal, mental, emotional approach that we don't typically experience or have the opportunity to do in other ways and places. So thank you both for that. Jazz, I'm going to come back to you on this. Are there any, you were talking about the programs that you all do, but are there other themes or topics or areas of significance for organizing, for activism, for Indigenous people in your all's work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely when we think of the protection of territorial land, and we just launched a video that I'll share here in the chat called Somos Territorio out of Honduras, that talks about the impact that climate justice is having on both Honduran communities, but Indigenous communities, that's causing them to migrate north, right? And looking also in the defense of their territory and of like the water rights and kind of like what's happening there. I think there's a lot of issues that actually intersect with both communities. One of the things that I heard loud and clear actually from our joint board retreat in February in Santa Fe together was data collection, right? And Judith brought this up in terms of like, they say that they don't have the data to go after the Native vote, which is kind of BS because it's intentionally designed that way, right? To Judith's point, all these systems of like to provide disempowerment of communities are intentionally designed to do that, right? There's no accident. And that's why I think Deb Holland's appointment to the DOI, which I worked at the DOI for about 2 years, and huge leaps and bounds that she was able to put place. And it shows what happens when we invest in the leadership of the communities that are representative of the issues that are impacted, right? So data collection is one of those things where if we don't have the data, white dominant narrative and white dominant institutions will say, well, there's just no data for us to be able to know that we should go in and invest the money so that communities can do X, Y, and Z, which is crap. Because there's relevant data, and there's also relevant, kind of like personal experiences, shared lived experiences that can tell you what the issues are within communities. But if they're relying and falling back on this kind of like white notion of data to be able to supplement or increase the funding, then we're always kind of failing behind, right? Or they're going to use their own kind of data to justify whatever. So data collection, data representation, I think is a huge thing. And we also saw it with the census, this last cycle, that was just kind of a hot mess, right? So data, the impact of data collection and data, I think is one of those things that is really critical and really important. And especially for those of us who are working in philanthropy, there should be better ways for us to be able to do the work and support without requiring that. And then I think another big thing that I hope we'll touch upon in the conference, there's two more things, is missing and Indigenous women, right? The femicides of northern Mexico, the femicides that are happening at the border, and at the level that we're also seeing missing and Indigenous women, and the lack of attention to them, right? The lack of understanding why the criminal justice system does not work in the same way. I know we know why, but it is a huge issue that also impacts the Latina community. And it is a point for us to kind of look at the ways in which whether it's patriarchal systems or like white supremacists within certain regions that are doing this, right? we have a shared issue there that we can also be able to approach. And I think youth, right? Youth education, youth arts, youth power is another opportunity for us. And I actually really think, I think we're in a really interesting time right now where we're starting to see kind of Native narratives outside of what is our local communities and into mainstream communities, right? We're seeing Native characters, we're seeing Native music. When we look at representation, it's still not at the level that I think it should be at when I think of reservation dogs, right? And what that's done for representation of young people to see themselves in a much larger scale. But also Standing Rock brought so many young people out and activated them and organized them in a way that we hadn't seen in a while, right? Probably from during the Trump administration, we saw the youth truly activate as well, right? So I think those are areas for us that there are opportunities for us to come in, invest together, be together, build together. And then I know that there's like a lot more, but those are some that come top of mind.
Right. No, I was going to say, this question, I was like, this is the MES. Like, this is what we could sit here and talk about all day. But I think like in the way that you brought all of those four together, yes, absolutely. Like I want to continue to, I've written them all down because I'm like, where else can we sprinkle these in and keep referencing back to them? Because that is such a powerful, I think, in talking about the conference and talking about each of our different works at HIP and at NAP. So I'm really excited for Judith now to like bring in from the grassroots perspective within Native communities or within Indigenous communities. What are the themes or topics that are areas of significance?
So, Jazz, that point on data is very important because we know from working at the grassroots, our practice-based evidence, which is the way our people have always lived, is that can be confirmed with statistics and data. And because we've always been considered insignificant, there's very little data that had been collected. In fact, the first time the Labor Department collected unemployment statistics for Natives was 2 years ago. No, a year ago. And they're not releasing the data every month like they do for all the other communities. But it is a big step and something to ponder, that the Labor Department has not conducted surveys on unemployment ever in Indian country. We have, and so we have families and we have places where there's generational unemployment, and that's a fact. But the Labor Department has totally ignored it. And we have partnered with Illuminative, the National Narrative Change Group. They're a sister organization, and we have done 3 cycles of the first ever Native survey of Native people. We've surveyed over 16,000 Natives in all 50 states in a 3-year cycle. And what we have found is that the data confirms our practice-based evidence on what's on the minds of people, but that no matter if you are urban or res, no matter what tribe, state, or federally recognized, the 3 top issues: sovereignty, climate change, and economic security. In different states, they would shift from 1 to 2, but they were the 3 top priority issues. So that data alone means what? Number one, that the narrative of who we are in the 21st century and our relationship to our historic and inherent relationship to the natural world is on the minds of even the 70% of us who are wicked urban. Number two, the issues of concern of climate and economic security are majority issues. So one thing in our organizing that we have been talking a lot about, and the leadership development work that we do 3, we're going to start doing 4 national trainings of elected tribal leaders, traditional leaders, and community organizers. We do it 4 times a year where we bring 40 folks together and we share the stories and we sharpen our skills as to how to build and strengthen our traditional cultures by utilizing the ways we've always build community in order to maximize our power to influence policy. So with this survey, we have also found that people not only think about the issues, but they're very educated about civic engagement. That 87%, I think, said that they studied the platform or the voting record of candidates.
Mm.
That's huge. The majority of the electorate don't do that. The truth is, though, that many candidates do not see the priorities as we experience. We can still continue to be ignored by the political parties. Well, one political party ignores us entirely. The other political party is really striving to find a way to connect to the issues. But there are no candidates who are making at the center of the struggle for democracy the fight for sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are the only peoples that have had a self-governed, collectively owned land base since the beginning of time. There's no other peoples, there's no other community. And we may have been forced off of the land, moved, our languages stripped from us, but our relationship to governance and resources is a historic thing. And so the Constitution is the one document that guided. There's a lot of lousy things in the Constitution, but the really important things are the establishment of treaties and the recognition of sovereignty and the fact that only the Congress can change that relationship to the federal government. And there are only three entities that under the Constitution and how the federal government is established that have this direct relationship with the federal government. It's states, cities, and tribal nations. That's it. So when people attack the Constitution and they want to concentrate the power in the executive branch, like Project 2025 advocates for, then they're ignoring sovereignty as a critical foundation stone to democracy. Because sovereignty at this point means protection of Mother Earth. Sovereignty at this point means regenerative economic development, where Indian reservations, there's generational unemployment, there are also experiments going on how to generate energy, how to protect salmon, ensure that salmon is protected from extractive fossil fuels and climate. On our reservations, we are experimenting, and in urban areas, experimenting with native Montessori training of our children, and language support and building and strengthening of the use of our language. There's so many innovative things going on in Indian country that are under the radar. But the fact is, sovereignty, climate change, and economic security, those three things are at the heart of what Indian country needs, but what the majority of people in this country and the world need.
Oh my gosh, guys, how are we supposed to chew that up and keep moving? Like, you're making it really hard today. No, like Judith, I think when you're talking about like those three things, for us in our work here at NAP, I think that's really echoed in our like tribal listening sessions. Like those things, those three topics continue to come up as being the top issues that our communities are asking for, or that is how we see philanthropy's role in these spaces. And I don't know if you all had a separate call without me, but you magically landed on like you landed on a good number that I just want to take a moment to like elevate and let's review. Like environment, I want to come back to that in just a minute, but environment, we know that 80% of the world's biodiversity is maintained by Indigenous people. That is something that I think, and we were talking about climate change, Judith, that was one of yours, Jazz, that was one of yours. That is an Indigenous issue. The leaders in the space and have the sustainable answers for that space. Data, Jazz, thank you for going into that. I know that the data nerds on our team are watching with glee, hearing you say all of that. But truly in everything that we're doing, data is power, and that's how it is. That femicide, and I would, Jazz, if you don't mind, I want to expand that to like missing and murdered Indigenous people.
Yeah.
Like that femicide, what that is, youth, sovereignty, Judith, a champion for sovereignty, of course, and then economic security. Those 7 are where we can stand in solidarity because there is those parities. So I just wanted to elevate that good number and say thank you for that. I think we got a really robust and refined, well-rounded view of what that will mean for us. So,
and none of those issues can be solved by one community.
No.
None of those issues can be addressed without strong solidarity and collaboration, because those are issues that, again, are majority concerns.
Yeah.
And so we bring medicine into a very divisive political environment. If we approach those issues not from the angle, if we approach those issues in the way that the Navajo speak about living, and I'm not going to use my Boston accent to speak Navajo, but the translation of the phrase is walking in beauty, walking in balance, not being reactive and fighting, but really using the power of our belief systems to press forward for what is good, not only for our people, for humanity and the natural world. All those issues are interwoven, and we have to be able to navigate the pushes and pulls of the political environment in order to strengthen our cultures to play that role in the movements for social change. And the more leaders that we can circle up around this concept of walking in beauty and using the power of our values for political solutions, for uniting people to require and demand and pressure the federal government to respond to the needs of the people and protect and expand democracy, the better it will be. Because you can't do it alone. We would have achieved sovereignty by ourselves if we could have. And the fact is that the federal government isn't a handout sovereignty. Okay, we're going to give it to the Kiowas, then we're going to give it to the Caddos, and then the Navajos, oh yeah, you got it. No, it's when we have a much more deeply democratic political system and a more deeply democratic economic system. And that means system change, and that requires majorities.
Judith, I want to pull something that you were talking about, this idea of like rounding out community. And I think something that we have to always consider in those conversations are this idea of intergenerational. That walk in beauty isn't something that we just do now. It's something that we have to, I think, start with, train others in, show them how it's done, and then allow the next generation to also continue that walk in beauty. So in that vein, do you have any advice or encouragement for Native youth or the next generation of Indigenous activists as they're getting started or as they're continuing on in their work?
Well, first, not all elders are wisdom keepers. Not all young people are leaders. And the beauty of working and organizing at the grassroots in order to make social change possible is that there is a role for everybody. But recognizing that each individual plays a role in the larger circle. And I say that because, man, I've been waiting all my life to have the benefits of being an elder, like riding shotgun, always getting shotgun, always getting my coffee given to me, and getting a seat, and controlling the radio on road trips. All those things, I've been working on that, waiting to be an elder so that I could have those things. But the truth is that without intergenerational organizing at the grassroots and collaboration, you can get a distorted version of our belief systems. Elders are to be respected. We've been to a lot of rodeos, but elders also have many blind spots. Let me tell you, I work with a staff of 15, 14. I am between 35 to 40 years, between 20 and 40 years older than my staff. The closest person in age, my work husband, who's Kiowa, by the way, from Oklahoma, he's 20 years younger than me. Now, when I'm working in this circle, I see each of them as my equal. I don't see them, oh, this is a young person. I see them as my equal. But in doing that, I have blind spots because I'm not always aware of what it is that motivates people of other generations. Because my generation, we're crusty. Let me tell you, if you came out of the late 60s and 70s movements and were shaped by those movements, I had to struggle for many decades to learn how to walk in beauty because I was an FU organizer. Back then, anger was a leadership quality. You needed to be angry in order to show you were militant, in order to be a leader. No, I'm sorry. It doesn't work. So when you have elders and young people together, and the middle-aged people, throw them in too, then you have a blend of vantage points that actually help you to be strategic in how to organize a community campaign. It allows you to be strategic in the policies that you need to advocate for and create. So that intergenerational work has to be the efforts of both the elders and young people to seek a balance and not privilege one over the other. I mean, it's just like Western knowledge and Indigenous knowledge. Vine Deloria, one of our greatest philosophers and thinkers, said repeatedly, you can never afford to privilege Western knowledge over Indigenous knowledge, nor should we privilege Indigenous knowledge over Western knowledge. We need to weave the knowledges together for the good of our people in every stage of history. As you can see how that weaving happened back in historical terms in the 1800s when you think about the treaties that were signed. But the truth is that path towards sovereignty, towards a more democratic economic and political system, we have to be weaving knowledge and really thinking with an open heart, open mind, and discernment how to work together intergenerationally. And it makes life exciting, it makes life interesting, but more importantly, it kind of creates strong circles at the grassroots level when you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Judith, I don't know if I would ever have used the word crusty to describe an elder. I do appreciate that
I am crusty.
But I want to really, Jazz, talk about like while this weaving, and I think that's just a beautiful way to think about it, of like as this weaving and this circle strengthening, it's happening on the grassroots level. Jazz, like Hip and Nap find themselves in new rooms sometimes, but I think also like laying a path forward or trying to like strengthen or safeguard sometimes that weaving. So what is the role that organizations like R2 can play for advocacy and for community at large?
Yeah, it's a great question. I agree. I would not call any elders crusty. I think they all play a role, but Judith said it, so I'm not going to say nothing about that. But I think, and I know we have some questions coming in kind of around like philanthropic systems. And I think there's a reality that we have to acknowledge that we are working within an institution and an ecosystem that is not built for our communities, right? And I think that's the unique role that HIP, NAP, APV, APIP, LGBTQ funders that we play, is that we get to be a bridge between our communities and the philanthropic sector to say, this is what is needed for our communities to thrive. This is the power of our communities. And I think what HIP and NAP do really well, as well as the other affinity groups, and also Change is one of our big partners that kind of holds all of us, is that we really speak about our community from an asset framework, right? We don't come in and say like, pobrecito us, look at how, impacted we've been, but we are able to say that there's really like a dignity in asking for what is owed to our communities, right? If we're looking at 7 generations forward to understanding what is going to be needed for our communities to be able to thrive. Similarly, we're also looking for 7 generations back and say, pay us what you owe us, because it's due to these larger systems that have impacted the wealth building of our communities, the youth, graduation, college retention rates, right? The recidivism, the alcoholics or substance abuse that's happening within both of our communities, right? And really a lot of communities. But I think for us that we bring a dignity to the ask, right? In a way of saying like, you owe us this. And you have an opportunity to invest in our power, and not one that is like, help us solve the problem, because our communities know what is needed to solve the problems. We just need the money to be able to kind of help it go further, right? And I think what HIP and NAP also do is that I think we're not also just relying on the power of these philanthropic sectors, but kind of looking at these larger collaborations or the creation of funds with similar like-minded progressive organizations, whether that's Four Winds, whether that's Tides, whether that's NEO, right? We are also able to kind of bring these other bigger names to our communities, to the forefront of the things that we're fighting with, so that they can invest in our communities, right? And so I think we play a really critical role as a bridge builder, but also as a spotlight, right? I think we have a responsibility to use our platforms in a way that is helping people understand that, at least for the Latino community, it isn't just about immigration. To Judith's point, similarly, Ekis did a whole survey in terms of what are the top things that are top of mind for people. Economic wealth, climate justice, crime, or the criminalization of our communities is a huge thing. And then later on, you get to immigration, right? So these things that Judith mentioned earlier, they're the same things that are coming up for not just Latino and Indigenous communities, but really like all communities. And again, we're looking at the larger impact of these policies and opportunities for the collective whole, right? And so for us as HIP, and I think also, and this is why I love working with NAP, is that we are able to kind of engage together, and also with our other partners quite often now. And I think we learned this from the Trump administration, is that the more that we can be in community and communication to understand what we're each working on, even if we're talking to someone that maybe our work doesn't align to, but we know it aligns with NAP, we immediately point them to NAP. We immediately make the introduction. Eric is fantastic. And what I love about Eric as well is that he is really a people connector. There's sometimes people in our sector who are the collectors of people. They just collect their people. You never get access to them, and they're that gatekeeper. What I love about NAP, and I think the leadership of APV, HIP, and APIP and everybody, is that our networks are fully opened. We are super deeply connected with one another and moving as one with whatever's to come in 2025 and beyond. And I think we learned those lessons from 2018 on, that we need to be in deep communication and solidarity for the benefit of our communities. And it's, I think, the responsibility that we bring to the work within the philanthropic sector.
Oh my gosh. I feel like all of them are going to use that answer now. Like, I can already see it posted on everybody's social media, because yes, like that is exactly, I think, I've never heard it said in that way. You did that beautifully, Jazz, to say, what are we doing? Because I think not only are we doing NAP, but I think at NAP, it's before Secretary Holland, you both talked about how it shifted priorities, or how it shifted things drastically. And so for so long, I think our communities have been under attack, that we've had to just like guards up, puppy guard, like sovereignty is our sovereign right. It is something from time immemorial. And we don't oftentimes get to come into those communities and spaces to say, okay, outside of the treaty and trust obligations that you have for us, here's also what we're owed on top of that. And so to be able to join in that work with, I think you named all of the partners of the Change partners. It is humbling from my perspective to see how everybody's interacting with one another, to see those different communities represented. And honestly, to go into those progressive spaces where we can have different kinds of conversations because it's said among family, because it's said among, we don't have to translate or we don't have to safeguard this information. Both beautifully done.
One thing that is really important to remember is that philanthropy, and I said this at a NAP conference years ago and I spoke in the plenary, but philanthropy needs us as much as we need them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They need us for their own spiritual humanity. They need us to fulfill their missions. We need them to fulfill ours, but we need each other. And if the federal government was doing its job for all the people, then philanthropy would not be needed. But because government has failed us, government has failed to meet the treaty rights, then philanthropy is filling that gap. But in the end, we need a much more democratic political and economic system.
Yeah.
Philanthropy is not, it is for all intents and purposes for us a big, huge Band-Aid but we need to build our capacity to govern and to elect people who we're negotiating with, who understand the needs of all communities. I mean, that's what the struggle for democracy is all about, is making the playing field a little more even so that we can rise together. Because we never have. Because when one sector rises, the other sector doesn't necessarily rise, especially when everything is stacked against us, especially in the economic arena. So we need philanthropy as much as philanthropy needs us, really.
Absolutely. I'm glad I appreciate, Judith, that you're bringing that here. Like, we're bringing it to these audiences and saying, don't forget. Like, that underpins all that. I do want to take a chance, you two, to just kind of like, Jazz, you'd mentioned this question we've got from the audience. So I want to kind of take just a tryst into, like, from an organizational perspective or from the nonprofits as they interact with philanthropy and grassroots organizing. We have a question from Teresa. How do I generate support from grassroots community-based participatory programs?
So, and I think there's two parts to your questions, right? In terms of, like, there is this sense of, like, the difficulty of navigating philanthropic systems that are only funding the surefire projects. I think, and I want to acknowledge that we're actually in a really difficult fundraising philanthropic moment right now, right? We have the attack of the Fearless Fund and the impact that has on race-based grant making. APV, HIP, NAP, APIP, we've all come together. We have the Ready Coalition. The Ready Coalition, and I'll share that resource as well, is really looking at holding the line of race-based grant making. We're not in a position where, like, people should be alarmed. It's coming out of the Fifth Circuit. It's only 3 states. Like, they seem to have squashed that to keep it isolated. But we know that there's other lawsuits coming because that's how these white folk move, right? So one of the things that we are doing is to hold the line and to ensure race-based grant making really continues. And also we're also in a difficult fundraising moment. And I just want to really acknowledge that for folks. I think that the challenge and I think also the opportunity is when really understanding, if you're a grassroots organization that is leading grassroots campaigns and you're doing this kind of work, really understand the portfolio of which you are applying to when you're connecting with philanthropic partners, right? Make sure that you are not, putting forward a project that is not within their portfolio. Maybe it's in another portfolio, because I think one of the things that COVID taught us is that we shouldn't go back to old grant making ways, right? When COVID hit across our communities, one of the things that we saw the philanthropic sector do, as well as intermediaries like us, was release the funds, release everything you've got, no strings attached, no reporting, just get the money out, right? And we were able to all be really successful in being that bridge, right? I think there's a push right now to be able to do the same thing and work with partners to be able to fund, especially at a general operating level, so that organizations can do whatever they want to do with their funding. It's not prescribed by a certain foundation or a community trust, whatever that is, to be able to carry out that work. And so we are seeing now a trend of, because people are afraid of the race-based lawsuits that could come, they're providing general operating support for organizations to do whatever they want with it, right? And so I think how do you either create support for the projects that are grassroots? I think it's just understanding and knowing who you're talking to, what they fund and how they fund, so that you are presenting that information, and you shouldn't be having to adjust what you do to fit the portfolio needs of an institution. If that's the case, then I would tell folks to actually don't do that, and actually go look for the funders that are funding this work, because there's a significant level of funders that are actually funding participatory democracy building protection based work, right? So I think that's my recommendation in terms of like how organizations and nonprofit leaders can kind of approach the philanthropic sector, is really understanding who you're talking to, what they fund. And if you feel like you have to change what you do, then that's not going to be the right funder for you, honestly.
Judith, I want to extend the opportunity to you if you've got any experiences.
Well, I think when you're involved in running a program, you don't necessarily have a lot of time to keep program offices up to date. But that's pretty critical, because we have to help philanthropy understand that they can't just cherry pick like this one thing that they want to invest in, but they have to understand the whole ecosystem of communities in order to know whether or not their investment is actually contributing to the growth and the regenerative economic development, it's strengthening governance. And so I think for program offices, we have to have we have to lean in more to keep people abreast about the community as a whole, not just our projects. So that when you have if you already have an established relationship, not a new relationship, then you can help them understand why something that's new and innovative needs to be invested in. But that takes time and a lot of energy, and we're always running and gunning. I know that. But I think it's worth the investment, because many program officers are coming from our experience. More and more foundations, even the larger ones, are hiring people from the field. So even though it's harder to raise money, I think how we raise money from a nonprofit angle has to be more value-centered and more giving the program offices more opportunity to advocate to the foundation, giving them the tools to advocate for more innovative funding for more innovative projects.
Oh, absolutely. Judith, I love that you use the word advocate, because I think it really just hits home, like this idea that advocating doesn't always take place on the front lines. There are certain places where advocacy work goes through all of our work. And it is, I don't know, I'm bringing in this idea and concept of the running and gunning, or I always said like the spray and pray, or throwing spaghetti on the wall, whatever you want to call it. Like, there is something to be said of when you're in community doing this community work, you're just hoping for the best. And we do have to maintain those communications, but there is brilliance from our communities coming out with this, getting the money out there, Jazz, this idea of Gen Ops funding to do what you need to do and to trust that the work is being done, because it will look different. And it does look unique when it's done in this ecosystem, or when it's done outside of our own cultural awarenesses. So I appreciate that, but really want to hit on this idea of like nonprofits that are doing this work, that are spraying and praying. We've heard, I think, from some of our members, that there is this, they cannot lobby. And so this idea of advocacy efforts can sometimes be a little bit nerve-wracking or needing some support and ideas of how do we go about doing this? So for nonprofit organizations and that cannot participate in lobbying, what advocacy efforts can be undertaken to educate without getting them in trouble? And Judith, I'll throw it to you for this first one.
Well, number one, collecting data and making it publicly available and spreading it around, talking about it, putting it on social media. I think that supports advocacy. It gets people thinking. It's about narrative. It's about getting people prepared. I also think for the betterment of all communities, nonprofits, we need to struggle to have C3s and C4s. We need a full court press to be able to utilize all the tools. But a lot of the work that we can do is educational. Mm-hmm. That is a C3 thing, and people should not be fearful of that. Candidate education, elected officials education. It's not about advocacy, it's about letting them know practice-based evidence, what's happening, what is on the minds of people, what are the key issues. So I think that educational and the use of social media in that respect, and using social media to educate decision makers and policymakers is something, it's one of those areas where we're not always as strong as we need to be in our work, and I think that's a really important avenue.
Thank you for that, Jazz. I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think using the data to tell the story is going to be important, right? What is the narrative to be able to share what is happening, and then what can people do, right? I come from a comms organizing background, and so in my mind, the data is really powerful, but you have to relate that data in a way that makes sense for everybody to understand what the impact is, right? And how do we scale empathy to understand that we're building outside of just a Native issue? We're building around these much larger collective issues, larger solutions, again, for the greater whole. And so I think the storytelling and bringing people from the top of funnel, right, from awareness to education, to then really bringing them into participation and activation are really important to be able to understand how we're moving different audiences and different leaders, the power map, right? If we're looking at traditional power mapping and organizing, how are we bringing people closer and closer to the center, to the core of the work? How are we activating, and how are we keeping them to ensure that we can continue to activate them as we go along, right? So I think that's really critical. So yeah.
I appreciate that. We're going to start pivoting, I think, to wrapping down the conversation. But there was one question I really did want to elevate in this space, and it was, for each of you, like, how does the preservation of Indigenous culture and traditions play a role in sustaining advocacy and activism efforts? I feel like that is something that has been an undertow to our answers, but I want, in closing, really want to take a chance to just enumerate that. So, Jazz, if you want to start us on that one.
Yeah, and I think I want to acknowledge something. I think as we're thinking about, and as we just, honored Indigenous Peoples Day, I think one of the roles that we have, and I know we haven't had a chance to really talk about this, nor do many people want to bring it to light, but Palestine, right? When we're looking at the role in the preservation of ancestral and Indigenous practice and histories, what we are witnessing in firsthand again is the erasure, right? The genocide. And it's something that I think for a lot of Chicano, Latinx, Indigenous communities, we feel it deeply in our bones because we are survivors of multiple apocalypses, right? Within our minds. And to see that happen in real time and then relating it to the importance of preserving it, that's why, right? Because of the systemic efforts that have been made in the U.S. colonial settler history of the United States to erase that from our memories, to erase those things from our lineage, to erase those moments from who we are. And I think that there's a beautiful, like as a healing centered coach, there is a larger movement to come back and to heal communities, to heal leaders in a way that reminds them that you have ancestors, we have spiritual lines that are connecting us to the work today that allow us to move the work forward. And also there's Indigenous and ancestral practices that will help our communities continue to thrive, continue to survive, right? And I love Hawaii has a program right now where there's a healer in every home. They're trying to get an intergenerational healer. And now what would that look like at a national level to be able to break generational cycles, right? Of whatever is within our lines, right? In our both as collective community trauma, but also individual familial trauma, right? So for me, the preservation of practice and history and knowledge and language is critical, so that not just young people, but I think all of us collectively understand where we come from and what we're building towards. So that for me is critical. It's important to, I think, our worldview as Hispanics in philanthropy, and why that cosmology and return to ancestry and language is so important. But it's something that I think should be centered in terms of the work that we all are collectively doing every day.
So thank you for elevating that and bringing that into the space with us. Judith, I'll throw it to you now for the question of how does the preservation of Indigenous culture and traditions play a role in sustaining advocacy and activism?
The most important element of preservation is practice, the practice of protocols. You know, it's how we do things. And I think the starting point for a really winning campaign to change a policy or to advocate for representation is our values. And for those who practice traditional ceremony, you know, for many Native groups and community gatherings, we always start with some reflections, some words of encouragement or prayer. Why? Because it is a moment to bring hearts and minds together, to kind of clear the atmosphere for us to function in a circle as a whole, and to understand each other or listen to one another. So I think the preservation of culture is the practice, is how we do things. You know, for example, during Standing Rock, the International Indigenous Youth Alliance, Youth Council, did an action on the bridge that had been blocked off by the National Guard. And it was a prayer action to go there and to try to help those National Guardsmen who live in the same area, who were from North Dakota, but to pray for them, to help them understand their own role in this present moment, and for their humanity. And it was very powerful because, and I forget what they offered, what sacrament they offered to them, but many of the National Guardsmen took it. It touched them. Now, they were under orders to do certain things that were very violent and attacking our right to protest. But in the end, it would be very interesting to know how it impacted on their lives. But the International Indigenous Youth Council, they had the stability of their values to go unafraid and to offer that to those who were opposing us. So it's how we do things that preserves our culture. being good relatives. That's a part of intertribal culture, how you take care of one another. There's so many practices that if we continue them, it's medicine for other communities, but it strengthens our core kind of life force. Because the only reason we continue to exist as tribes and Native communities is because of organizing and advocacy and activism. We've been doing this since dirt. That is what we've done from the beginning of time. Our history is not only of wars after first contact, but of peacemaking. Both. And we can't deny one or the other, but we have to utilize the ceremony and the protocols that actually gave people the courage to do peacemaking. And that's how we're going to preserve our cultures. Practice how we do things.
I would clap if it wouldn't freak our system out behind the scenes. I mean, doing it since dirt, Judith, if you cannot accept icon status after that, I don't know what else you need. That has to be a t-shirt. Somebody has to make this happen. But okay, so I think as we typically do, we like to close our time together by giving you the floor. And Jazz, I want to do this for you as well. I know your members are watching, but for us at NAP, we always say our audience spans the entire public sector and beyond. It's got funders, the Native nonprofits, elected officials, and we also have our budding future leaders that are watching. What is something that you would want to leave with them, having a better understanding of, or what can colonized philanthropy do to support and sustain Indigenous voices in advocacy and activism? So I'll throw that to you.
Awesome. I love this question. And I think it's actually very simple. It's one that we also say as it relates to the Latinx community, is that every issue is an Indigenous issue. Every issue is a Latinx issue, right? You could throw gum on a wall on issue based, and I promise you, whatever you land on is something that impacts Native American communities, Indigenous communities, whether it's on the US side, Latin America, around the world, right? So as folks are building out their programmatic portfolios, their strategies, you should be centering Indigenous communities in every single aspect of your work, whether it's from all the way up in northern New England to California, from Alaska down to Texas. There are Indigenous issues, communities that are impacted both on the rural side, in the city side, in terms of what our communities are going through, and especially what Indigenous communities are going through. And if that is not a central part to how you are looking at the impact of your program, then you should come talk to NAP. You can even talk to HIP and we'll tell you how to do it, right? But really NAP is the people that you should be talking to. But it's not either or. And it's also, don't put us to be able to fight over crumbs, because NAP, HIP, APFI, APIP, we work as one, we roll as one. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things, is that we are asking for the whole piece of the pie, or our own pie. We'll make our own, and maybe we'll invite you. We're building our own tables at this point. And so I think if you are not centering these issues at this point, I think it's negligent. I think it's intentional. And people should know that, right? Because there's no excuse for people to say that they don't know, because there's actively, whether it's nonprofit leaders, nonprofit organizations, organizing communities that are doing this powerful work. All you have to do is look at Instagram with the right hashtag and you'll see what's happening, right? The land back movement is massive, and it isn't just isolated to certain parts of the country. We are talking about national, international movements. So at this point, if you are not doing this, like I said, it is negligent. And it should be something that is central to every portfolio of every foundation, both the big one, the old ones, to the local community ones, right? Center Native issues in every aspect of your work and your hiring. So I'll leave it to that.
Leave it to that. You didn't just shift perspective yourself. Are you kidding me? I love this. I don't know if it's the caffeine hitting or just being in space with y'all. This is rejuvenating to hear, and to be able to center in saying this is it. We talked about we talk about that abundance mindset. We can't operate from a place of scarcity. It's not one piece of the pie, and us getting more doesn't mean somebody else gets less. We're building tables, we're making pies, we're doing the damn thing. Like, let's continue to go. Judith, call us to the mat. What are you leaving us with?
Well, I think for organizers, for leaders, for people in philanthropy, for leadership of philanthropy, the most important traditional practice that I struggle to do myself is reflection. To take moments every day to reflect on how did you walk that day? What did you accomplish? Where am I going? How do I get there? To reflect. And it's important because it helps you imagine what it is that you need to do in order to fulfill your role, whatever that is. And I really agree with what Jazz was saying about how everyone needs to be connected to indigeneity. And frankly, I think indigeneity and an indigenous framework could fundamentally change the policies from the federal government on down. If we were led by indigenous framework of the time cosmology, the timeline of how we are all in relationship and things that we do have an impact far beyond the immediate for generations. If we were guided by that indigenous framework, we'd have different government policies, we'd have different ways of relating between communities, have different ways of operating in philanthropy. So I think at the center of every foundation's mission needs to be three things, actually: indigeneity, how to imagine oneself as a part of the larger cosmos. Number two, climate. Every single organization from a PTA to the Ford Foundation to have as their mission the awareness and the commitment to try to address climate, period, full stop, so that it becomes such a critical social force in society that the federal government, all governments, will do what they need to do in order to stop or at least slow down the incredible catastrophe that we are in the midst of. We're not waiting for climate change. We are in the midst. The wildfires in Crow Reservation, where I just left, in Sheridan, Wyoming, are the largest ever in history. Lahaina in Hawaii, the flooding in North Carolina. These things are happening every day. So we're in the midst of climate crisis. And then the third thing that I would argue is kind of critical to developing the mission and the interconnectedness that we need to solve the most difficult problems. And that is to understand that democracy, a truly inclusive, multiracial democracy, is a constant struggle. One election cycle is not going to solve all of the problems we face in our communities. One election cycle is not going to shake up the foundation of the embedded anti-democratic forces who are controlling county election boards, state houses, city councils, electricity and water commissions. These anti-democratic forces, of which there are millions, and who hold a lot of influence in the narrative, but also in policy, they will only be challenged to question their belief system or to get out of the way if we are totally focused on imagining what a truly inclusive multiracial democracy could be and to take steps to it. And I think philanthropy is on the road to it. Many more foundations are centering the struggle for democracy, and it is not one election cycle in which we'll solve this problem. It's going to be a generational struggle to democratize and therefore achieve sovereign status as Indigenous people.
To quote you, period, full stop. Yes, ma'am. That's where I think that this ends. Like, truly, I am humbled to, I think, just even be sitting here listening. I have been writing so much down, and will, yeah, I would like, I should have brought my notebook. I am on a hotel pad. I'm going to need another, but thank you both. I think, like, as we've all seen, like, conversations like this are beyond important for Native, Hispanic, and Indigenous communities to carve out space for. And we've been lucky enough to be able to embark on that with HIP today. It is ongoing, Judith, like, to go back to what you're saying, it is ongoing. It is putting it into practice. Yep. And I hope that we're at least attempting to do that in our organizational operations going into 2025, in centering these conversations and coming together for these moments of collaboration, in these moments of solidarity. But I do just want to thank both of you for, I think, being the amazing women leaders just in general, but truthfully, like, everything that you've done for your communities, the burden, I always say, like, I think our MES speakers, the burdens that you carry, and not only coming into this space, but in the work that you do day by day, icon status for both of you, truthfully. Like, it is humbling, and being able to elevate this and share that with this platform is the greatest joy of my job, is just being able to sit front row and watch what's being done for community. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, of course. So as we begin to wrap down, I do want to just also thank HIP and their members for joining us today. We do sessions like this monthly here at NAP, but being able to expand our audience is amazing. So Jazz, I want to welcome you back onto the stage in wrapping things down, and just make sure that you're able to give some time here for goodbyes. If you guys have any traditions, traditional farewells, whatever you all send your audiences off with, I want to make sure that we honor that with the time and space here.
No, well, Bobby, thank you so much. You gave us so much love, but we are so, so grateful for you and the way that you hold space so powerfully, the way you build not just communities, but, you know, we are in deep relationship with one another. And I really love and appreciate that about our NAP, HIP NAP collaboration and partnership. And to also thank you to Eric, who I know is just an incredible visionary leader for the work that NAP is leading, into our own Ana Maria Arguilagos, who works so closely with Eric and is also in deep, deep relationship, not just with NAP, but also with Indigenous communities. So I just want to say thank you. Hasta pronto. We will see each other soon. And thank you so, so much. And again, save the date, June 16th to the 18th. We'll see everybody in Albuquerque for our joint conference together.
Absolutely. Again, counting down the days to give you a hug and just be in that space together. So I know virtually.
So thank you, Bobby.
Well, NAP members, we do appreciate your continued support for our ongoing program, and in particular, your support of our membership education sessions. As a reminder, these sessions are open to the public as a highlight of our membership benefits. NAP membership is open to Indigenous relatives and non-Indigenous allies. If you're not a member of NAP yet and want to learn more, please visit our website, nativephilanthropy.org, or email Reina Diviade at rday@nativephilanthropy.org. I'd also like to take a moment to push membership for HIP. There is nothing stopping you from joining both organizations. And I think, as you've seen today, it just puts you deeper in the work, and it increases those stakes. So more information on their membership can be found at hipfunds.org/members, or by emailing Stephanie Ruiz Perdue at stephanie@hipfunds.org. Lastly, you should be receiving an email with a link to a short survey. Please take a few moments to share your opinions and what you'd like this session series to look like going into the future. It should only take about 5 to 6 minutes to complete, but it provides invaluable feedback for our team and for planning these going forward. Believe it or not, 2025 is just around the corner, and we're already starting to look at how to ensure these survey results are integrated into our program offerings and making sure that we're meeting you where you want to be. Help us help you by making them the best things possible. Lastly, we want to end our time together with a reminder to vote. This is our final convening before the election day. Your voice, your vote is vitally important to national, state, and especially in local elections. I think Judith talked on the dispersed millions of anti-democratic actors that we experience today. Those are the people we don't vote for. So, but please make sure that you are in either direction. You are exercising your right to vote. It is so important to center, I think, us as the community and moving community in that way. We've not, as Indigenous people, we have not always had that opportunity. So take advantage of these hard-fought rights and join me and others in being the best ancestor possible, regardless of how this election might turn out. And there is one thing that will not change in all of that, and that is our commitment to sovereignty, to Indigenous communities, and the efforts to secure our animate and inanimate relations for the next 7 generations. We're centering this commitment, and Jazz did an excellent job of teeing this up, I think inadvertently, of talking about land back, talking about native lands and sacred places. As our first program, knowing the administration will be working on in the next 4 years, that's what our MES will be next month. We'll be exploring land back, how it's operationalized in communities. We'll also be talking about Indigenous futurity, about what that means at a global scale and within our spaces. So join us on November 21st, same time, same place, and we'll hope to see you there. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a terrific Tuesday and make sure to have a wonderful week. Bamapi, everyone.